Welcome to another episode of We Don't Die. I'm your host, Sandra Champlain, author of the book We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. And just a reminder, my home base is wedon'tdie.com, where you can find past episodes. I've got another podcast on iHeartRadio called Shades of the Afterlife. We offer a free Sunday gathering inspirational service with medium demonstration included. We've got a great Facebook group so you can meet like-minded people and so much more. That's all at wedon'tdie.com. Now on to our episode today. Did you know that every day around the world, thousands of people are placed in medically induced comas? For some coma survivors, the experience is an utter blank. Others lay paralyzed, aware of everything around them, but unable to move, speak, or even blink. Many experience alternate lives spanning decades, lives they grieve once awakened. Some encounter ultra vivid nightmares, while others undergo a deep spiritual oneness with the universe, or say they have glimpsed the afterlife. Our guest today is Alan Pearce, co-author of the book Coma and Near-Death Experience, the beautiful, disturbing, and dangerous world of the unconscious. Alan is a journalist, broadcaster, former BBC correspondent, and author of several books. He has contributed to numerous publications from Time magazine to the Sunday Times of London. You can find out more about him and his website, which is alanpearce.com. Alan, welcome to We Don't Die.
Sandra, thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you here. Now, you're not just around the corner from me. I'm in a little town in Rhode Island on the east coast of the United States. You're about 6 hours east.
Yeah,
You
and
want to tell
some, I should
people where
say.
you live?
I'm in the middle of nowhere, France. If you dropped a pin into the middle of France, I'm kind of about there and to the left a bit. And it's rural. If it resembles anything, it resembles Lord of the Rings and Hobbiton, with the rolling hills and the small farms and the rivers and the forests. It's like that.
It
And
sounds
I feel
beautiful.
personally that I'm in heaven when I
Yes.
open the door and walk out of this house.
There's something special and very healing about nature. Well, I read a little bit about you in the introduction. If you'd tell us a bit more, and then, yeah, about your life and what in the world had you research the world of comas?
Well, yeah, why coma? Because you think if you wanted to name what could possibly be the most boring subject under the sun, it could be coma. Because quite frankly, we all think it's a blank. Well, it isn't a blank. You know, I'm more surprised than I can explain to you, that I've actually written a book about, along with my wonderful wife, a private investigator, a book about coma and what happens inside coma. My background is foreign affairs. I used to cover wars and disasters and things like that. And I slowed down, had a bit of a mishap in Afghanistan, and started changing what I do. So I started investigating the internet, which was, kicking off around about that time. And I learned how to operate under the radar and do things like this. And I used that to train journalists and human rights lawyers in how to protect their sources, how to research without setting off alarm bells, how to share information without it being intercepted. So that was generally what I was doing. And then COVID struck, and both of us were at a loose end. And I'm watching far too much TV news, but I'm noticing that so many people with COVID were being placed into medically induced comas. And I'm just wondering why. How does that work? Must be a good thing. Do they have a nice sleep? What is this? So I thought I'd look into it. Now, the medical world will tell you, if you ask any doctor, they will tell you that coma, prolonged deep sedation, is an essential tool in critical care and has been for the past 50 years. It allows for a deep, restorative sleep that allows medication and nature to do their job, and that the event itself will be a complete blank in their lives. And it's the best thing that we can possibly do for any patient. That's the official story. I just don't take the first answer as gospel, so I had to just look a bit further. Fast forward a bit, I found a number of coma survivors on a Facebook group, the Facebook Coma Survivors group. And I was allowed to sort of sit in the sidelines, as it were, but not post, not having been in the coma. And people were posting the most remarkable things that didn't have any reality or didn't bear any resemblance to what the doctors had been saying. They all seemed to have a range of symptoms that were near identical, that had almost nothing, if not nothing, to do with the original reason they were placed into a coma. Uh, Cognitive problems, memory loss, shocking memory loss, physical pains, agoraphobia, all sorts of complications. But so many people with different ailments were after the event describing the same things. So alarm bells started going off in my head. And then there's the other side of it, that people in coma, not all, are having a blank experience. And I've got to make this clear, you can't dream inside a coma, because the whole point of the coma is they switch your brain off. And if they were to wire you up to an EEG brain scanner, you would be flatlining. You do not go through your circadian rhythms, which means you do not experience REM sleep, which means you cannot have dreams or nightmares. Nothing is going on. And yet, it would appear while people's brains are flatlining, their minds are incredibly active, and they're going to all sorts of realities. Some are going back in time in their own lives. Some people are going to heaven. Some people are going to hell. And other people are experiencing things that, if they resemble anything, they resemble things that people report having taken the Amazonian mystic brew, ayahuasca. And again, that they will see heaven and hell, they will meet dead relatives, they will meet intelligent entities which connect with them in one way or another. These were things that coma survivors were telling me. I think within about, I don't know, within a few minutes of looking at that first page on the first Facebook group, I knew I had a story here. What kind of story? I don't know. But that began, and we just didn't stop. And with COVID, it made everything so much easier. For one thing, more people were at home, more people were on forums, more people were on bulletin boards and able to respond straight away. But the whole nature of COVID itself was bringing to light something that had gone unnoticed. That placing people in comas is not just dangerous, it's in many cases lethal. And because of the sheer scale with COVID, millions of people over the planet were placed into medically induced comas. Those that survive have come out just not the same people they were before. They're not the same people mentally, they're not the same people physically, they don't relate to the people around them in many cases. Oftentimes you might come out of a coma and having had, and we can talk about this, an alternate life, which seems more real than this one that you've woken up into. You don't think this is the real life. And when your partner leans across the bed and his or her eyes are full of love for you, you think that person's a stranger. And all the things that made you fall in love with that person, you don't know them anymore necessarily. And you're trapped in this world. And for so many, it's a horrifying experience. So one of the things I wanted to do with this book was to show coma survivors that they are not alone, that they did not go mad, and also to wake up doctors and nurses to make them understand that you shouldn't really, and we prove it, absolutely prove it, that you should not be placing people into prolonged deep sedation. Short periods, no problem with that. If you go on the operating theatre, and you're down for 2 to 4 hours or whatever, you are effectively comatose. You are in a coma. And it is the same drugs that they're using on the operating table, which there are no cause problems, for 4 to 6 hours, that they're giving to people for up to 3 months and more. And the effects of having those drugs pumped into your system is just catastrophic, absolutely catastrophic to the body. Whoa. So how did I get into this? I stumbled onto this story, and the rest is history, you might say.
It sounds like you were meant to stumble onto it, given your
Mm.
background and your passion to be able to make a difference in so many ways, educating medical personnel as well, but then also for patients and patient advocates, is this medically induced coma absolutely necessary? Ask the
Well,
question.
here's the funny thing. I have no concept of wanting to, of writing this book. No idea that I would ever want to write about this book. It looks on the face of it a horribly complicated subject, as all books, as you come up with an idea, turn out to be. And yet it was possibly the easiest thing I've ever done in my life, because whenever I met one person, it led me to another person. All the time, doors were just opening for me. And I was just meeting precisely the right people at precisely the time I needed to meet them. And this became uncanny, and to the point that it was freakish, that this just kept happening over and over again, even to the point of getting a publishing deal. Um, if I wrote how we got a publishing deal as a plot in a movie or something, people would just laugh. That's preposterous. But I effectively, within 2 hours of writing the last word, had the makings of a publishing deal, just because I happened to mention it to a friend who says, "Do you mind if I mention it to my publisher?" And they went, "Whoops, we want that." And that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. But the whole book has been like that. And it's, something this complicated, we have made exceptionally easy to understand. It is, I say it because we wrote it, but it is a joy to read. It's a journey of exploration. I began this as I can't even say a skeptic into the realms that people were describing to me. I just hadn't even given the moment's thought. And yet, after time, I'm speaking to people face to face who have died and come back. And when I say died, I mean in many times, many senses, in the clinical sense, that they, heart attack, they're out for 3-4 minutes or longer and resuscitated. And the things they tell me, we get this with the near-death experience. And partly that's why the book is titled Coma and Near-Death Experience, because within coma, a large number of people are experiencing the classic near-death experience. By that I mean beautiful pastoral landscapes, meeting dead relatives, life reviews, etc. People within coma are also reporting like a flip side of that coin, like they've gone to hell, for example. People trapped into the most shocking scenarios. Sometimes they're trapped into loops. Now, when the doctors and the nurses are walking up and down that ward looking at all the monitors, they think that patient is sleeping peacefully. I'll give you the example of James, whose stories, multiple stories, are in the book from James. He had to watch his wife. He's not married in this life. He had to watch his wife dying in childbirth in the room in front of her, not just once, not just twice, but over and over again on a loop. And that is how he was trapped for what just felt like an eternity. Oftentimes, when they try and bring people out of a coma, they reduce the meds or switch them off. Sometimes it takes people weeks to fully gain consciousness. Other people will come out biting and fighting and ripping the tubes out of their bodies, and they've got terror in their eyes. It could be that they're having experiences very much like James, that they're watching, say, their wife dying in childbirth over and over again, and they're desperate. One woman that helped us with the book, Chiara from Italy, when she was coming out of something horrifying, and she felt that she had all these tubes in her, and she just ripped them all out, and blobbers going everywhere. And she said it felt so sweet because I was bringing myself, connecting myself back with this world, getting out of that horror show. But the doctors and nurses, they see the panic in the eyes of the patient. They think the best thing to do is to render them senseless again, and they turn the meds back up. And for all we know, they're going straight back into watching their wife die in childbirth.
That's horrific. I know
It isn't it?
from some very real nightmares that I've had that thank God that I've woken up. So
Yeah.
what a world. Oh,
No, and so much of this, we talk of nightmares, but no one would have a nightmares akin to the kind of things people relate within coma. They are so beyond the human imagination. We can get into details, some of the accounts. The book is a mixture of well, it's actually a story of people telling their stories. It's the doctors and nurses who discovered or have put their hands up to us and said, "I'm sorry, with the best will in the world, I have killed or harmed patients by doing what we felt was the right thing." So there's those stories. And we've got the stories of the people who were placed into the medically induced comas, how they were just like forced into it because no one says, would you like to go into a coma or not? They just do it. Sometimes they don't even tell the people that they've been in a coma. And So we've got the stories of the coma survivors, people entering these realms. Some are so sensationally beautiful, they're heart-rendingly lovely, and others are just defy the imagination. And when people have alternate lives, they're having lives so rich in detail. So the book is telling these stories, and it's also telling the aftermath, those that survived the coma, just how they're not the people they are anymore. That they feel, for example, one told me, she feels like she's trapped in the plot of the movie Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where everyone else around her looks the same, but they're not the same people. They're like actors, and everything feels phony. And that is not an unusual experience for those coming back. And so many who come back from the coma, particularly those that had alternate lives or beautiful experiences, just wish they hadn't come back. They just wish they hadn't.
In a moment, I'd love to find out some of the stories about people who've seen loved ones, those sort of things. But I know during the writing of this book, you had your own personal experience, your own. Would you
Yeah.
share about your daughter?
Well, I did touch on this earlier, but my life, I used to cover wars and disasters. So I have to say, sadly, whatever, I've seen a lot of dead people, and I just assumed that they were dead. I never stopped to think about, the spiritual realm. If somebody said near-death experience, it would be like I was nearly knocked down by a car, but I got away by the skin of my teeth. That's the sort of thing I thought that was. So I'm investigating this along with my private investigator wife, who leans more in that department than I ever did. Um, and I'm investigating this just like a journalist on the Sunday Times, making things stand up, knocking things down, finding people to tell me their stories, etc., etc. I'm halfway through the book. I mentioned before that I spoke to a number of people that died and came back. The penny hadn't dropped for me until my daughter Rebecca died out of the blue. She was a police detective, and we had no reason to think anything would happen to her, and she just died out of the blue. And okay, it is the worst thing that can happen to a parent for sure, and probably to a human. And I had all of those things simultaneously, along with those sensations, feelings, and all the rest of that. I knew she hadn't died. Not like, okay, she died in this world, but she hadn't died. In the course of the book, I learned, taught myself that it's like a byproduct of the book in the sense that we demonstrate that life continues after death, because so many stories of people relating, getting really to that point. And in many cases, you've got to bear this in mind. If you're in an intensive care unit, you are close to death. If they put you into a medically induced coma, you are very close to death, and the meds push you further. So a lot of people are as close as you can get to death's door. When the few occasions when people are wired up to brain scanners or whatever, it comes as a shock to see that there is no activity. It's called a burst suppression. We generally call it a flat line. There is nothing going on in there. Anyway, so I had all this now, all this understanding that when that's happening, people are moving on. People have gone somewhere. I can also look at the scientific side of it, which we have done, and say that the first law of thermodynamics says energy can neither be created nor destroyed. My daughter was a ball of energy. Where did that go? It had to go somewhere. So for me, the penny dropped, as you might say, that I then realized that, whoa, my entire world outlook had changed as a consequence of writing a book. And I hadn't realized until something had really brought it home to me that my outlook had changed, but it had changed 100%, swiveled. And, you know, I don't write it up that way in the book, but everything in the book that brought me to that point, everything I learned that brought me to that point is in the book as part of the story of other people's lives that we are telling. And I couldn't think any other way. And so when I think about Rebecca now, I mean, I've got a friend staying, and I haven't seen him since Rebecca died, so we've talked about that a fair bit. I do not feel the sadness I would have expected myself to feel if you'd asked me prior to this. I actually feel really hopeful. I feel like, yeah, okay, she had a really good crack at this game, became a police detective, wasn't exactly a dull life. And she's gone on to do something equally interesting, and she's starting all over again. Because that's another thing, predominantly around the world, people believe in reincarnation. Historically, they believe in reincarnation. We don't currently, because we tend to generally subscribe to a form of science from the 1600s that says such things don't happen. And if you think about them happening or talk about them happening, you're talking mumbo jumbo or spiritual nonsense. Yeah. So that's the world we're in. That's the world I felt I was originally in. And now I completely come out the other side. And now when we tell the stories in the book, yeah, I mean, I believe them anyway. I was believing them even before I didn't realize, my outlook had changed. It's mind blowing. I say this too. It's so good. We had the publishers wanted an audio book, so we had this South African actress we know, Danny Painter, and when she tells these stories, it is just something else. This hairs stand up in your neck. She's got an accent which most people don't know, which is South African, which sounds like liquid sunshine. She's got the most crystal clear diction. And when she, heartfelt, okay, here's the thing. We used Danny when we had the book in the publishing process and we were doing a podcast. And I asked a South African journalist friend if he knew anyone who could do a Cape Town accent, because we had this story, Isabel's story, which is mind blowing. He said, Danny, you got to have Danny. Danny did this recording. It's like 10 minutes long or so. I was like blown away. So when the publisher said, we want to, do an audio book, we said it has to be Danny, has to be Danny, has to be Danny. Her husband died. Her husband is 17 years, out of the blue, completely died, dropped dead. And utter shock to her. She, however, just as we're asking her to do the book, she says, yeah, I'll do the book. So she reads the book. Now, she's famous in South Africa, and she could, doors are open to her. So she could go around to spiritual and religious leaders and ask them about everything she was feeling with her grief and her loss. And she even spoke to Nelson Mandela's former spiritual advisor. She said the book helped her more than any of those people, that the book gave her more peace, and you can hear it in her voice. It's stunning.
What a gift. We
Yeah.
need those stories. And I know from my own point of view, researching and doing over 450 episodes here at We Don't Die. I've got a second podcast where I'm an investigator on the afterlife, now over 200 episodes. It's the stories that make a difference. It's great for
It's people, isn't it?
It is.
There's people that make stories. Without the people, there's no story, is there? But these are stories that are beyond the imagination. I don't know if I think I've maybe touched on this before, that no one has ever researched this subject before. Because if people were to recount events after a coma, they're told it's psychosis, they're told it's an hallucination, they're told it's a false memory, and anything other than that, you're just mad. And even with those diagnoses, you're suffering a form of mental illness. Most people think they've gone mad and shut up about it. They don't say anything. Therefore, no one could actually see the problem. And here's another thing about being a journalist, that, I've interviewed an awful lot of people who've survived disasters and torture and all manner of things. And there's a way of talking to people like that where you don't just blurt out a question. You got, if you have the opportunity, you become confident, with each other, comfortable with each other. And I was able to do that with the coma survivors with the book. I related to them in the same way I related to people who've been through the most traumatic personal experiences. It's like watching Gaza on TV or something. These people are so tormented, and more often than not, the things that they told us for the book, they never told their nearest and dearest. They've never told anyone because they thought they were mad. And the only reason they told us for the book is because we've been talking about the book with them and what we're trying to achieve. And they see the importance of telling their story so others realize they're not alone.
Very similar to veterans that have had near-death experiences. There's a
You
whole
get
bunch of research.
PTSD.
Correct. And they want to go back and they come to this life back. And it's like, oh, I liked where I was before. and opening.
PTSD and NDE happens
Yeah.
so much in the military world, particularly with everything that's been happening with your forces and our own in recent times. Uh, but you imagine being a roughy, toughy soldier and giving your sergeant a near-death experience. You know, they just laugh at you. So you keep it to yourself. Everyone keeps it to themselves in that environment. Um, you know, here's another example. I spoke to an expert in NDEs, many in point of fact, and one said to me, you want to just ask around your circle of friends and just see who's had an NDE. So straight off, I asked two journalists. One of them's with me here now, and both of them had had near-death experiences. The one who's not here now had one in illness, where it's effective. He wouldn't say angels, but he's describing angels. And Philip, who's here now, was caught right up in combat in Burma and just for absolute facing total death. And he just went into an utter bliss state, and at the same time made his way out of the trench system he was in. It was akin to a near-death experience, but neither of them had told anyone because it sounds crazy, huh? And only because I asked them directly, have you had something, that they owned up to it. And I bet if we just asked around our friends, our neighbors, not that many of us, brave enough to do so, but if we asked around, I think we'd get far more responses than we ever imagined. I think events such as the near-death experience are way more common than people have any understanding of. I think spiritual happenings are just dismissed as only glitches in the machine or whatever. I mean, if you actually think about it, I've had quite a few that I just thought, okay, wipe that one off. That's a bit weird, but there we are. These things are happening. Somehow we have opened a doorway to another entrance to this world via coma. And it takes us off on all these different tangents. I haven't talked of alternate lives. I'll give you the example of Nick in the book. He's just one. In this life, he owns and operates his own pizza parlor in Columbus, Ohio, and he gets pneumonia, goes into septic shock. They place him to a medically induced coma. He's out for 2 weeks. During that time, he lived an entire life set in the 1960s and 70s in Midwest America. He got called up for a tour of duty in an alternate Southeast Asian war. He talk in detail about it, but minute detail, the fact that it was always raining, when he was on patrol, when his entrance always raining, that his fingers and toes were constantly wrinkly and stayed that way for, he felt like, years after he got back to the US, as it were. In that world, he said it was like the US, but not the United States on a map. Things were oddly mixed up. The atmosphere was slightly orange instead of ours, which is blue. But he had a whole other life, different relationships. Towards the end, he moved to this small town in the Midwest, and he met this lovely young lady, and they got it together, and they had a baby girl, and he wasn't feeling too well, and he don't know what happened, but he said like the floor opened up, and I was free falling into nothingness. He opens his eyes, and he's in a hospital room, and there's a young raven-haired woman sitting next to him with love in her eyes, holding his hand. He can't speak because of the damage to his vocal cords. This is normal for weeks and many times. She's saying, "Thank God you're back," or words to that effect. And he's thinking, "Who are you? You're in the wrong room." He doesn't know who she is. He was one of the very lucky ones in that he could understand what happened to him. Many other people have no one to talk to anyway. His partner was so incredibly understanding and accepted everything he was telling him, he was telling her, and not treating him as a nutcase. And it enabled him to make an adjustment back to this world. But he brought back things from that life to this life. The Nick pizza parlor owner couldn't change a light bulb. The Nick in the other life, the guy that did a tour of duty, he was brilliant with his hands. His dad was a big time motorcycle mechanic and taught him so much. He could fix anything, and he could grow all manner of things. But this Nick is not like that. But the Nick who comes eventually out of his coma starts getting back into real life. His girlfriend's heating and ventilating system broke, and he went up, took the panel off that, looked at that, figured out what the problem was, went to home base, got the part, put it in. Hey, presto, it works. He couldn't believe he did that or understood how he did that. He's fixed his neighbor's push lawnmower. He's fixed his car a couple of times. The walk-in fridge freezer at his pizza place broke. Mechanics couldn't fix it. They told him to scrap it. He went in, changed the level of Freon. What the heck's Freon? And it's working again. Now, it's just blowing his mind. So he was exceptionally lucky that his partner didn't think he was nuts. Other people, there's just like, I'm not going there. Or what they will generally say, a loved one is, well, dear, let's face it, until recently, you were drugged up to the eyeballs. What do you expect? But think about it. There's no drug or cocktail of medication that can give you an alternate life spanning decades. Well, just a fortnight passes in this world. If there were, we'd all know about it. We somehow, through the process that he has gone through, he's gone back and probably experienced either an alternate life or, as I'm thinking, a previous life where he probably did die as a heart attack soon after his baby girl was born. You know, but
There's
you
a whole
explain that to a
world.
doctor. But you
Oh,
explain that to a doctor, and they're going to say, that's a false memory, pal. How can you have a false memory spanning 20 years? And he could talk about the frostbite he got when he used to work up in the north, all that stuff. There's not a false memory, or you're
and they're
hallucinating.
clear. I know
Oh,
from
that's
near-death
it's so clear.
experience interviews, they're more clear than any memory. And I don't know
They
about
say
you,
this
but
too. They
dreams
say this.
disappear momentarily. I mean, when we wake up in some vivid dream, like it's gone. But
Yeah.
these are so real.
No, these are nothing like dreams. Like I said at the beginning, the process, the REM sleep, all the rest of it, it ain't taking place. So
Right.
that's not happening. And we're demonstrating by looking at this that here's somebody who's effectively flatlining and that their brain's incredibly active. There they are, defending home and heartland in the American army or whatever. And yet their brain scan is completely flat. So, where are they going? They're going somewhere. They're really going somewhere. But his was a good experience. In fact, you had a nice life and had lots of girlfriends and had really great fun doing all sorts of things. He had a kind of madcap life, to be honest. And put that one down as, yeah, that would deserve a heart attack. You really pushed it to the limit. Other people will find themselves in situations so out of the experience. For example, Debbie. Um, Debbie also had, she probably had COVID, but it was before they were testing for it. And she went into sepsis. And, Deborah if you ask Deborah how long was she in a coma, she'd tell you 80 years, 80 years. I think she was out about 6 or 7 weeks. In those 80 years, she was employed as a living mannequin in a serial killer themed pub where nightly they would enact their crimes on her and others. And this went on for 80 years. She could measure the time span through various events. She had 3 children, for example, through rape at this time, and the children were taken from her. Eventually, after 80 years, the bar had to close, and they didn't know what to do with her. So they sold her to an organ harvesting facility, put her in a wheelchair, wheeled her over to some organ harvesting facility, where they dropped her into a water tank, and she just watched her body dissolve. Now, this went on in her mind for 80 years without a break. You come out of that, you can't explain that to your nearest and dearest. It's not like saying, hey, hon, I did this and I had this different life. That's so off the scale. You can't tell people that. You imagine being in some support group and you're all sitting around in chairs and people were saying, I had the most terrible nightmares. And then you had 80 years in a serial killer themed pub. You're not going to open your mouth. And this is effectively where we've come in, because we've allowed people who were scared stiff to even open their mouths. We've given them the room to tell the stories. And we've got 20 plus coma survivors who are hands-on helping us with the book. You know, we'd be researching things, finding things out, people telling us stuff, and we'd be chatting with them, not actually interviewing them, just saying, hey, you never guess what I heard today. This expert in false memory says you've made this all up, and that your story that we related to her, she says you've rehearsed a lot over and over in your mind. Boom. And you do that, and then you'll start getting reactions. People, we didn't do it for that reason, but we're sharing what we're learning. And as we're getting positive stuff, we're telling them the positive stuff, as well as trying to get explanations for the crazy bad stuff that's happening. It's a wonderful story. I mean, I keep saying this. I actually don't think I wrote this. I know I'm good. I'm really good, but I'm not this good. And even combined with my private eye wife, who's damn hot hand at researching. This book is beyond that. It is so something else. Like people might say to me as they do, oh, what are you going to do next, Ellen? What's your next book about? I couldn't write another book because I couldn't top this. There's no way I could do anything that I'd feel even the fraction of satisfaction that I've got from doing this book. The people we've helped, I've done a few interviews and so on, and some radio phone-ins. We did one radio phone-in. 7 callers phoned in, 7 had been in comas, 7 had never spoken to anyone about it before in their lives. Yeah? And it's happening to millions of people. And I guess if you ask around, because of COVID, so many people were intensive care, and you don't necessarily need to be in a coma to experience certain things within intensive care that are also way off the register, and we look into that. This has happened to an awful lot of people. And it needs to stop because it's totally unnecessary. And I'll just say this briefly, I said we proved it's wrong. It's not so much us, that there is no medical literature anywhere advocating prolonged deep sedation. Place people into a comatose state on the operating table if they're having, say, a brain seizure, but you don't do it for 3 months or so. You only switch them off for 5 minutes or so, and so on. There's nothing in the medical paper, medical literature anywhere saying do this, but everyone's stopped doing it simply because people do not see the damage that they're causing, because no intensive care unit staff follow up their patients. The patients are followed up by other people down the line, but not by the intensive care staff. So they don't see the damage they're causing. They practice what is known as experience-based medicine, meaning we've always done this, we'll keep doing it until we see a problem. If they practiced evidence-based medicine, which we present at the back of the book for their benefit, and also to back up everything we say, all current evidence points to the fact you must never place anyone into prolonged deep sedation, because it is lethal, and for the survivors it is life-changing, and there's no reason whatsoever to do it outside of a handful of cases, and again, as I say, not prolonged, just short. So this book feels so important, and that millions of people every year globally are put through this procedure, and they do not need to. And even if they weren't dying in the numbers they were, and it was seen in COVID, the medical stats are really clear on this, the number of those in coma vis-a-vis other forms of treatment, the numbers that did die were really, really alarming. And people are being put in coma for things, and you go, hold on, kidney failure there's nothing anywhere that says place someone into a coma for kidney failure. But I keep finding them online. I'm still finding people online. Someone had a lung transplant, and then they put them in a coma because it wasn't going well. How's that going to help? They're on a ventilator. It's not the same as breathing yourself, And so people are just doing it. In many cases, they're doing it rather like, oh, what should we do with this? I don't know. Let's put them in a freezer, and just see, how it turns out, because that's really how it's coming across. But most doctors and nurses are doing what they're doing out of the goodness of their hearts. They're doing it because they're kind individuals who've been drawn to that profession, but they're doing bad medicine, bad medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And the history of medicine is one of constantly changing. They drained blood from people at death's door for 2,000 years to balance their humors, right? No one does that anymore. Yeah?
That's
Go back to the time machine 170 years, doctors weren't washing their hands. Yeah, because you wouldn't ask a gentleman if his hands were clean. That's so rude. Yeah? So it changes, and one day they're going to wake up and go, okay, this is what I want. Magic genie. What's your wish? But I walk into a second-hand bookstore, you know, towards the very end of my life, right? Or somebody walks into a second-hand bookstore like 20, 30 years from now, let's put it that way, and they find my book, Coma and Near-Death Experience, and they go, oh my, people really did that then. That is so primitive. Right? That's what I want people to think. And it's not hard to move from where we are now to that. It's just a lack of understanding that people simply don't know the damage they're causing. Those that come out cannot express what's happened to them for fear of being labeled mentally unwell. Whoa.
Well, I know, Alan, that our listeners and our viewers share things. They share on social media. They get into conversations like, have you ever heard of this? And so this is dinner time conversation, meeting with friends, and then these stories can be shared.
Yeah.
So
I
we
mean,
will do
do
our
ask
part.
around. Because as I said earlier, when I started asking about NDEs, it wasn't just I didn't stop at my two war buddy mates. So many people have out of body experiences. People have told me that they've not owned up to, and just things, just odd happenings, glitches in the matrix, um, things that no, I didn't see that, and you just dismiss them, but
Right.
they're happening, and I know they're happening, and I have a completely different outlook now, and yeah, I feel completely at peace about the whole thing too, about life, my daughter's death. Yeah, and yeah, I could go on forever, but my spirit, I'm on a journey of spiritual learning and understanding, and I'm at the early stages, so I'm kind of excited. I mean, there's a lot of this has gone into the book because we've spoken to the right people, which has helped change my outlook. But there's so much more to know.
Oh, there'll
So
be
much more to know.
more. Could you share some of the experience of good things, people maybe seeing a relative or something in
Yeah.
that
Okay.
line?
Okay. Something nice. All right. Corey Agricola is a hospital chaplain from Birmingham, Alabama. He's an 8-year veteran of the US Marine Corps. If he and I lived closer, he and I would be bosom buddies. I just think this guy is amazing. He got some mystery illness, some infection. They don't know what the heck it was. And he found himself in a hospital bed in the hospital where he works, which is the UAB hospital, giant, based in Birmingham, Alabama. And they're giving him propofol and they're putting him in a coma. And he can hear everything that's happening around him. He can see everything that's happening around him from an angle that's not possible on the bed. He can read his heart monitor and all the rest of it. And he's making a note of it in his mind because it's going crazy. And afterwards, he can relate to people, say to his doctors and whatever, was my heart going up to this and that? And they say, yes, it was. And so he was saying all these things. And the doctors were saying to his partner at the time, his soon-to-be fiance, we don't think he's going to survive very long. And we're down to our last antibiotic. Handy hint for doctors, any listening, don't talk about the patient in front of them if they're in a coma. Not always, but often they can hear you, particularly in the earlier part of their journey. They start reducing his meds and he finds himself lifting out of his body. And then as they reduce the meds further, he comes back into his body and he's in a hospital. But it's a completely different hospital. It's another one down in Phoenix or somewhere where he used to minister, and he's back in this time, and he's just there, and he's got his Jeep Wrangler outside, and he's just living that life, and then it looks to his mind that he's seeing the photographs that decorate his home. And he's stepping into these framed images and going back in time, like he's having an actual Kodak moment. And he's saying to me, and here's one of mine of my dad. And I went back, and we're in Phoenix, Arizona. And I'm having dinner with my family and my dad's talking and I'm joining in the conversation and I'm there 100%. These are wonderfully beautiful experiences. But then what else is happening to him? He's taking flight, he's flying over mountain peaks, and he can reach down and catch the snow in his hand. And he says, you know, Alan, it was cold, cold to my touch. And the next thing he knows, scripture verses, bearing in mind he's a Christian hospital chaplain. So he is seeing things in a particular way, perhaps, but how his mind might help ease him into a new environment. And he's seeing scripture verses come up. Many he knows, the Lord is my shepherd, etc., etc. Then others start coming up that he just doesn't know. He's never studied them. And he's like, but taking note of them as they're going past him in space. When eventually he comes out of his coma, he starts looking them up, and they're genuine verses. And he's never, they had not paid any attention to them before, and they're real, just as they were in his mind's eye. He's in heaven. He does not see God. He does not see Jesus. He sees a mountain of light, the most magnificent, beautiful, awesome mountain of light. And he's never been so at peace or happy. And he talks about how, you know, the closer you are to death, God gives you grace. And this is just proving it to him. Now, he came out of his coma, tough old bird, former Marine. He's completely reinvigorated. He's been working at this vast hospital for years. He reckoned he administered to 14,000 patients and their families. He had burnout. He was completely losing the plot. Now, when he's talking to patients or families of patients, he can tell them that there is an afterlife because he's seen it firsthand. He can give them a firsthand account. And when there's somebody that's sitting beside their daughter in a coma, in the same room that he was in one instance, he can say, talk to your daughter, hold her hand. You know, it's a good chance she can hear you. And, you know, and they're explaining what happened to him within his coma. And when she comes out of this, you know, be prepared for this sort of thing and be gentle with her and kind. And he never had that before. And now he's like doing and he's holding workshops with other chaplains, making them understand now what is happening. And he's plugging the book as part of that, because the book for him has made the whole experience gel. And he was a joy to have discovered. And I got him by sheer fluke. You know, rather like herring spawning, I just thought I'm going to find some hospital chaplains because maybe they've spoken to people after coma and they might have heard stories. I thought I'd start in the Bible Belt. I thought I'd start with A. So I go to Alabama. I go to B for Birmingham. I find a hospital chaplain C. I send them an email. Bing. No, I can't think of anyone who's spoken to people about coma after the event, but you ought to talk to our chaplain Corey, because he's just had the most remarkable experience and wants to keep telling everyone about it. And it was just like jigsaw, like I was doing a jigsaw, and it's all the bits were being handed to me at the right moment. And meeting Corey was just brilliant. And Corey's a great one to bounce off as we're finding things and getting his take on them. And the book is full of these wonderful people. Wonderful people. And here's another thing, as I keep saying, you know, to survive a coma, you have to be strong, really strong, because they are pushing you to the very, very limit. It helps to be strong physically, but my gosh, does it help to be strong mentally? And every one of the people that helped us with this book are strong mentally.
How many stories would you say are in the book?
Don't know. Some are not as just what we've done. We've ended each chapter with, because it just flows into this way, ended each chapter with people's stories. But the stories that they're telling relate to the you know, facts and figures, as it were. It's the story that we're telling, you know, what we know of NDEs, and then showing what coma people are getting in NDEs and so on. So at the end of each chapter, there's individual accounts going right through to their coming out of coma and trying to get back to this life. Within the story of the book, we are just weaving in people's accounts because they're relevant to this and they relate to that. You know, we talked to a lot of people, well, not a lot. We spoke to a number of people who went to the Amazon, for example, and took the Amazonian mystic brew ayahuasca, the main ingredient of which is DMT. And the experiences that they're recounting really mirror those of what people are accounting within coma. And you think, some weird Amazonian mystic brew, active ingredient DMT, how is this happening? Turns out that the human body produces NN-DMT. No one can say for sure why. People speculate that it's the pineal gland, but other people say it's not big enough. You can't experiment on a healthy person. It's not ethical. You can't prod and poke the pineal gland of a healthy individual. So people are not getting to study this. However, laboratory models such as rats, you induce a heart attack in a rat, I'm sorry to say, and you measure their DMT levels, spike 600%. What the hell's going on? They're getting the sort of effects that people are getting when they're taking ayahuasca in the longhouse in the Amazon, right? Whacking great load, and they're off. So maybe all mammals experience a near-death experience, because if we pin this down, it would appear that those who are experiencing a near-death experience are having DMT pumped into their system, either to help ease their passing or to open a doorway to what lies beyond. But that's appears to be what's happening. And we found instances where DMT is naturally produced in people. You're going to have to read the book, otherwise I'll go off on a massive tangent of how. And what happens to them? And they're describing the things that people are describing to me in coma, with the one exception of the alternate lives. And when you find people talking of past life regression, I've yet to find anywhere they actually had a clear run at it for decades and had, children and accidents and vacations and different jobs and all the rest of it, living it minute by minute. I can't find a parallel for that actually anywhere. And if anybody listening wants to put some comments in underneath, let me know, because we nothing that matches the detail that people like Nick, whose story I told earlier, no detail, nothing of that detail ever.
We are such intelligent creatures, being human. And when you think of the intelligence of the human body, and I'm fascinated with all these kind of stories. And also, when we pass with DMT and the pineal gland and all those things happening, that makes our passing easier. But not only that, I've been fascinated lately with people who see their loved ones coming. That's a big thing, these deathbed visions. And
Happens in
there's,
coma a lot.
yeah, there's verifiable evidence that comes through that proves that it's not the imagination. It's not just a normal part of the brain shutting down, even with coma and
Okay.
near-death
Okay.
experience.
Can I give you a really strange,
Yes,
provable example of that? Earlier, I
sure.
mentioned James, who got trapped watching his wife die in childbirth. When he dies in the hospital, he's initially led down a darkened corridor, and like in a prison, and there's hands and everything coming out of the bars, and they're all calling names, and it's beyond creepy. But he's being somehow compelled beyond that. And he comes out into this open area, and there's a delegation waiting there. But they're not all in the prime of life. And they're old people, but really kind of old, crusty people. And there's this old woman, and she says to James as he approaches, "Who are you?" And he says, "Oh, I'm James." And she says, "I don't want James. Who's James anyway? I don't want James. Go away." And some guy next to her says, Edith, calm down." She says, "I want Dottie. I don't want James. Where's my Dottie?" And time passes, James comes out of his coma, and he's got a very sympathetic mum, and he's talking to his mum about this. And he says, "This is pretty wacky. Did I bump into a delegation waiting for somebody else? Do you know a Dottie? And do you know an Edith?" And she goes straight away, "Yeah. Edith's your great aunt. She died before you were born. Dottie is your other aunt. She has dementia. I'll tell her your story." And told the story, and she didn't even know her kids' names at this time, didn't know anything. And she knew and kept saying aloud, Edith, I'm coming, I'm coming." She died 2 days later. That delegation had to wait a bit for Dottie to turn up. But that's names.
Incredible. So, a couple of things. One, I will do my part and share your book and these words
Thank you.
as far as I can. That is a given. I don't know because I've never had a family member put into coma,
I don't.
but if there's an opportunity for someone to be a patient advocate when the doctor's saying this is what we'd like to do, can people say what other options are there? I don't feel comfortable with
Mm.
this. What should we do if we're
See,
faced with?
I really worry about this. I think if I were younger, I would have tattooed on my chest the words "no coma." I can't be bothered now. But if you go to a hospital and they say your darling daughter, she won't survive the night, she's going into sepsis, her only hope is to put her into a medically induced coma, and you say, I read this book a little while back, or I heard this great podcast, or whatever, and they're going to say, look, we're the doctors, and then you look over your shoulder and there's a security guard standing behind you. What the heck are you going to do? What the heck are you going to do? There should be consent forms. They shouldn't be doing it in the first place, but it should be an option. At the end of the book, we talked to this wonderful doctor, Japanese doctor working in the States, and he realized the damage that was being caused. And what he started doing was saying to his patients, look, the standard practice is to knock you out. I know the medical literature says to keep you awake and talks about the details of ins and outs of it. Here's your choice, in or out. So they all say, well, I'd like to stay conscious then. What he does, he then knocks them out for like 15, 20 minutes or so. You insert the mechanical ventilator in, and you, where possible, have a loved one sitting beside them. You gently bring them back round, having explained everything that's about to happen and is happening. Your loved one's there stroking your hand, rubbing your head, whatever. He said out of the 5 patients that he began with, 3 females, 2 males. The females handled coming out of it quite well, the 2 males did not, and had to have greater reassurance. In the same way that since you and I have been talking, we haven't given a moment's thought to our breath or rate of breath. No one does, but when you come out of a situation like that, it's the first thing you're thinking of, so you get into a panic station. Modern mechanical ventilators, the microprocessor controlled, they enable the patient to initiate breathing. So it's not like pumping you full of air, sucking it out, pumping you. You initiate that breathing. You distract them long enough, it don't take long, and they don't think about it. And those patients are up and about that day, right? Just a tiny, tiny bit of exercise, because the worst thing about being in a coma, if there is a worst thing, it's the lack of mobility. This is amazing. Again, for 2,000 years, people said, if you're sick, go to bed. Bed rest is the best thing. Turns out now that just 1 week of solid bed rest, as in not getting up at all, can result in the loss of 40% of lean muscle. That's 1 week. When my dear wife had COVID, she was like in bed for 3 weeks, barely got up. She was so skinny, and her muscle just gone. And she's like super duper fit, unbelievably fit yoga person, and she could barely stand. That was only 3 weeks, yeah. And this doctor's patients, they're getting up, they're sitting in a chair, with the help of the mobile ventilator, they're walking 100 paces. The nurses are taking them to shower. They're sitting there talking to their families via text on their phones. Another hospital, they said the patients are using their laptops to run businesses, and they're interacting, they're awake, and they're invested in their own recovery, right? They know they're getting better. Just the sheer act of getting out of bed and walking, you're getting better. When you come out of a coma and you don't know who the raven-haired a woman holding your hand and crying is, that's not a starting point for getting well. That's not, or you can't stand and you can't speak, and you don't even know this life is real or not. These patients that stay awake on a mechanical ventilator come out of it just like so much better. They invariably walk out of the intensive care unit as opposed to going out on a gurney. It's hard to say, the facts and figures and all the rest of it, but all the evidence we've gathered shows that they do. And we need to change this. We really need to change this. But so many doctors and nurses will say, if you're on the vent, no patient can tolerate having a great tube down their throat. Yeah, they can't if you just shove it down their throat. If, however, you introduce them to the notion gently and kindly and all the rest of it, and give them confidence in the procedure, then you can. But most doctors and nurses don't believe it. That's the first thing we need to change. You can do it. And we give examples of brave doctors and nurses who know that they have harmed or killed patients and now are fighting tooth and nail to change the system. One nurse, she wasn't a nurse, she's an administrator of an intensive care unit, placed into a coma, came out of the coma, had the most shocking experience within a coma, went to tell her friends in the intensive care unit, the doctors, the nurses, the anaesthetists, what happened to her, and they wouldn't believe her. They thought she was bonkers, crazy, mad, to be dismissed.
Oh my goodness. Well, Alan, our
Yeah.
time for today is coming to an end, but you've opened up a new world that I just want to research and share. Do you have any final words for today for our listener or our viewer?
Not really, but if you know anyone that this happened to, even if they're in intensive care with COVIDs, for example, they will have gone into a very strange level because they'll be sleep deprived. Anyone in intensive care is sleep deprived, and very strange things start to happen. People within coma are sleep deprived. If you can get people to talk about it, when finally we track people down and we gain their confidence, and people were talking to us about their experiences, not one, but several times, the word therapy was used. This is like therapy. Finally, thank you. Someone's believing me. So if you have a loved one that's been in a situation like that, say, oh, I heard this really wacky guy on YouTube. Did you experience anything like that? And see what they say.
Oh, those are some great words. Great. Alan, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Sandra, it was a joy. It was fun talking to you. It's really good. Thank you.
Absolutely. And for our listener or our viewer, thank you for taking the time to be with us. I'm going to ask that we all check out and get involved in the conversation of coma. The title of Alan and his wife's book is Coma and Near-Death Experience, the beautiful, disturbing, and dangerous world of the unconscious. And Alan's website is alanpearce.com. And as a reminder, my home base is wedon'tdie.com. Come join our Facebook group. Come join our Sunday gathering. It's free. It's inspiring. Join our Facebook group. Get involved with the conversation. We are here for you. We truly, truly are. In closing, my name is Sandra Champlain. I'm always so delighted to be your host. What I'm really getting from this episode is to start talking and asking questions. You never know in your life who's experienced something from a coma, near-death experience, signs, afterlife, deathbed visions, all of that. Once we start sharing and you realize that other people have had this experience, and most people don't share because we have fear of people are going to think we're crazy, but get the conversation open in your circle. And it feels good. It really does feel good to be able to talk amongst friends with the things that you're interested in. And do the research on coma and what's involved. And, here we have things that we can say. I don't want to be resuscitated. If it comes down to that, you may consider not wanting to be put in a long-term coma. I don't know. That's a decision we all make. But do the research. Know that you're loved. Know that right now you've got a team of loved ones around you and you're not alone. Your life here on earth is so important. So I really want to thank you for listening or for watching, and we'll see you again soon.